This is Dan Schneider. This is another of my Dan Schneider video interviews. That's Actors on Acting. The man before you is Casey Biggs. He's an American actor, and we'll be talking about the art and craft of acting and his career, and the conversation will begin in a minute. This interview is with American actor Casey Biggs. People online may best know him from his role in one of the Star Trek sequel series, Deep Space Nine, but he also has a long career in other fields or other genres of acting, and we'll talk all about that. Let me just start, as I usually do, and let's go back to the beginning, if we can, Casey. First off, your name is interesting in that it's Casey, and it's actually, is that your actual birth name? Were you named after like Sean O'Casey, the playwright? Or?
No, it's just Casey Biggs. Great name, because when I was young, there was not many Caseys growing up. There was maybe one in my high school. There's a lot now, though.
Okay. So let us talk about your childhood. You're in your mid-60s, so you would have been growing up as a child watching television in the late 50s, early 60s. Was there any particular show like Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett or something that said, I want to be an actor, or was that something that came to you later?
Well, mostly the reason that I wanted to be an actor was not through television or film, but mostly stage work, because I sing. I'm a singer as well. And when I was young, I was a choir boy in school, and then I sang in high school, and I was in all the musicals. I did the lead in all the musicals in high school in Toledo, Ohio. And there were some people who had seen me and who I knew who were quite, who had been professionals, and said, if you want to be an actor, these are the ways to go about doing it, and offered me a few ways. And I decided that I wanted to have some real training. So I auditioned at all the schools, and I got into what I considered the best school for it, and I went there. And knock on wood, I've really never had to do anything else. Juilliard is where I went ultimately in New York City. But I wasn't terribly interested in film or television until I got out of school, because I was training to be a classical actor, which is what you train to do. And then I spent years and years on the stage. And in my 20s, I got a few films and television. I did a lot of television. And then I went back to the stage for about 10 years, which I preferred. And now I do both. And I direct a lot as well and produce. So,
well, what draws you to stage? It seems that you do prefer that, as you said. Is it the immediacy? Is it the fact that you could really screw up, that it keeps you on your toes, whereas you can do X amount of takes in a movie?
No, it's an actor's medium. A film is a director and an editor's medium. As an actor on stage, the craft of acting on the stage is different than the craft of acting for a film for television. It's the same foundation, it's a different technique. But you're in control on the stage, and in film, the actor is just a small piece of the puzzle. And since I like to be in control, I like to be on the stage.
You mentioned musicals. When you're acting, and you're doing, let's say you're doing like a Cassavetes type realist drama, that's far different than a musical where all of a sudden, you may be doing something seemingly realistic, then you break out into song. Is that something that break from the reality? Is that something that you're drawn to in musicals?
It is, because it's nobody's terribly interested in watching. If I took a camera and followed you around for 2 weeks, it would be pretty boring. It's not terribly interesting to see constant daily life. So what's interesting about the art of both film, it's why, like in a film, the editor tells you where to look. On stage, the audience can decide where it wants to look, and you as an actor sort of have to know how to get that attention. But I find that I feel like I have much more. What should I say? Much more input and much more different kind of craft that it takes to telling the story. Because let's face it, we're all storytellers. You doing this right now, you're interviewing me. That's storytelling. It's all storytelling. And artists, from visual artists to musical artists to actors to whatever, they're all storytellers. We're all involved in telling a story. The storytelling on a stage is very different than storytelling on film. And what's wonderful that I've had in my career is I've had the opportunity to do both and to hone both of those both of the tools for both stagecraft and filmcraft. The older I get, the more I'm interested in being into directing, because you're really playing God when you're a director. Because I tell you where to look when I start directing, and also you're in charge of the story, which is what I like to do. But musicals, your original question was, what I find the musical genre to be incredibly unique, because acting as a craft and acting, you're you talk about objectives and you talk about how to act, and when you need to sing a song, your need has to be so great that you can do nothing else but break into song to say it. Now that's a technique and that's a crafty thing, and the best people who do that are the best ones that we have. So when you sing, when you're in a Sondheim show, and all of a sudden you start singing about finishing the hat, your desire and passion and need to have to tell that story so strongly. And there's nothing else you could do but break into song. That's the best kind of musicals. When musicals happen and the music comes out of nowhere, it's not very good in my estimation. So what's so wonderful about it, opposed to doing like a Tennessee Williams, or opposed to doing something like Man of La Mancha, it all takes a great deal of understanding of how to tell the story, and then ultimately how your instrument works, and that gets into another conversation about how you train the instrument, and then how you choose to portray the story. You were talking about like a Cassavetes film, right? A lot of Cassavetes stuff and all that kind of stuff has a great deal to do with improvisation. I come from a very classical background, where if you're the writer, you put months, weeks, years even into your writing, and you have an actor come in and say, "No, this is nonsense. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say this." To me, the best actor is I can take what you've written and I can translate that into action that ultimately makes your writing even better than what it is. Because I believe that an actor, the director should serve the playwright, the actor should serve the director in ultimately to what story everybody wants to tell. So when I come up against actors who think, "Oh, I don't need to learn the lines," or "Let's just improvise this," I think that's what's a good word? What's a good politically correct word to use? I think that's bullshit. So,
Before I just get too into the acting stuff, I just wanted to touch on I just want to speak about your family. Do you come from a family of artists, or was you wanting to be an actor? Something like, "Oh, come on, you need to be an accountant, Casey"?
No, actually, I have an interesting childhood. I was in a foster home from the age of 2 to 7 or 8 before my mother took me back. I went from being an only child in a foster home to the youngest of 5 with 4 sisters when my mother ultimately took me back. And so I have no recollection of my father whatsoever. So I have no father figure. And I was just lucky that the schools that I went to in Toledo, Ohio, they had great musical programs and people who had actually done a lot of good professional work, and they saw some talent in me, I guess. And I did, but no, none of my immediate family are in the performing arts at all. But they were all very, very supportive. But I left Ohio when I was 18 to go to New York to go to Juilliard, and basically never looked back. And I have been fortunate because I've played in rarefied air. I mean, Juilliard was an extraordinary place, very difficult place to get into. I mean, I think they auditioned 1,000 people my year, and they took 30 of them, and from that 30, 15 were cut after the second year. And there's great people. I mean, Robin Williams was in my class. Kelsey Grammer was in my class. I mean, Chris Reeve was at the school, was there, Mandy Patinkin. I mean, they were an extraordinary group of artists who became, and it's interesting because one of my first acting teachers died recently. And it made me think, you know, I mean, I'm older, much older than he was when we started working with him. And I probably know as much or more than he did. And they were just trying to work it out as they went, but they give you your early teachers really give you a foundation that will last you the rest of your life. You know, I taught for 10 years at the master's program at the New School for Drama in New York City. And I was thinking about how I felt about my teacher. And I'm sure there's probably students that I had that feel that way about me, because what you're doing is passing the torch, you know. And I didn't realize that I would like teaching as much as I did. Yeah. And I enjoyed it a lot. But the childhood thing, you know, let's face it, we're all products of our childhood and our families and all of that. And what's interesting as an actor, part of being an actor is really trying to discover how you work as a human being. And so much of that comes from how you were formed as a child and what you became when you grew into an adult, and how you deal with problems and how you deal with everything, how you embrace, how you look at. I just saw The Irishman, the Scorsese's movie that was just up. You know, it's a terrific film. But you watch these people who, you know, we knew some of these people, and how you relate to situations in your life has everything to do basically with how you grew up as a child. I mean, going through our you're around I don't know how old you are, but
I'm 54.
Well, we're in that, baby boomer age, you're a little bit younger, but all those years of like to be a really terrific actor, you have to do a lot of introspective investigation. I mean, it's like I always say, acting school was like 4 years of self-analysis, and you really have to know what makes you tick in order to figure out what makes other people tick. And when you're fortunate enough to be somebody like in a Scorsese movie where you can have the camera just linger on you for however long he wants to, and then you can let all that stuff live on the camera. On the stage, you can't do that. On the stage, you have to bring it up 8 times a week, and you have to. I liken being on the stage to writing a musical score, and also, a lot of people who are much younger than us. I talked to them when I was teaching. I would say it's like taking a stylus and putting it on a record. Well, not many people even know what a stylus is anymore, right?
Yeah.
So the style, you put the needle on the record. It's in that groove, and it plays to a greater or lesser degree of perfection every single time. Now, when you're working on the stage, you get 4 or so weeks to pound that out and try to figure out what that groove is. On the film, it doesn't really matter. I mean, what's his name? Woody Allen does 50 takes. So he's going to get something right in those 50 takes. Yeah. On stage, you don't. You got that one shot. And so the craft of acting on the stage is really very different than the craft of acting on a film. In a film, as I say, the foundation is the same in terms of how you engage your instrument, but how the act of it is very different. So I was in a film with I played Kevin Costner's brother in a film once. And I had not been a really big fan of Kevin Costner. I liked his approach. Sitting there watching him work, this is somebody who knew how to let the camera come to him, and that was a fascinating thing to watch. So I learned something from that. It was really interesting about that. And you can't let the camera come to you on the stage. You have to know how to tell that story in front of 800 or 1,000. I was at the Arena Stage for nearly 10 years. And that's a 1,000-seat theater, and it's in the round. And so you sort of have to know how to work that kind of a space and still tell the stories. I know I'm jumping all around over here, but all these things start coming into your head, and you start realizing what is your philosophy of working. which takes into what your original question was, is what is your childhood? What is your upbringing? What is your schooling? I mean, going to New York City when I was 18 years old was quite an eye opener from Toledo, Ohio. I mean, you're terrified for one thing, and you got to, and going through school, you have to break down all of those walls of insecurity and all those kinds of stuff, so you can actually be vulnerable in the moment. And I've always sworn too that you never really can use those tools that you learn in an institution like Juilliard until you're 5 years out of it. Once you get back what you had when you went in, it doesn't become really valuable to you. So when I moved into teaching as well, what was interesting to me about it is that I knew what I needed to learn then. So here I came into this institution where I had students from 22 years old to 50 because it was a master's program. And what was fascinating to me was that how do you engage each one of these people at the different times of their lives, different levels of their ability, different levels of their talent, and give them something that they can walk out into the world and use. I used to pound into their head, because I learned it at a young age, 3 things: relaxation, concentration, and imagination. None of us can do any of the work that we want to do without having a handle on all 3 of those things. Those things you can teach. I can't teach you any talent. You either have talent or you don't. I can give you craft. I can tell you and show you and help you how to engage all of those different things. And, it's helped me in my whole life, because once you truly realize that it's all about storytelling. I mean, my wife writes cookbooks. That's all about food. It's all about storytelling. Religion is all about storytelling. How you design and create your home. It's all about storytelling. It all says something about who you are. And that, as an artist, and sitting back and going, okay, I want to tell this story from this point of view. Like I directed a version of Love's Labour's Lost, Shakespeare, and put it in Argentina in the 60s and made it all about tango. Because there was something that was fascinating to me about rhythm and movement in the verse in Shakespeare. And I didn't know if it was going to work. It worked like gangbusters. And it told something of another part of a story that actually revealed more than just the text would have revealed anyway. And to me, that's why we do what we do, is to keep surprising ourselves,
Casey, let me just ask before I take a little break, a point of clarification. When you went in, you said when you were put into a foster home. So are you adopted into your family, or are you natural?
No, my mother, for some reason in the 50s, in that time, it was like 52 or something. No, it was 56. I was born in 55, 56, 57. My father had left. My mother had 4 other kids, and the only option I think she saw was putting me with a foster home. But when that foster home wanted to adopt me, that day she pulled me out of that home. So that, thankfully I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if she hadn't done that, because I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I'd had in that other home. But no, I went back with my blood family. But I was the only child and the only male in that whole group of people, which was interesting as well, I think.
Casey, I want to pick up on some of the things you said in your monologue. And by the way, feel free to go monologuing, because it makes interviewing very easy, and it gives you a sense of what the person is. And I often tell a lot of people are nervous doing interviews like that. I said an interview has two objectives. Number one, whatever the topic may be. Let's say if you were a philosopher and I was interviewing about your theories, and to give a sense of who the person is, and you would come across very strongly. So I wanted to pick up. You'd mentioned, theater in the round, and I've known a few, dinner theater type actors, and they've said that some of them hate theater in the round, others love it, because in theater in the round, there's no safe place for a secondary actor. You have to be on all the time. Do you agree with that?
Well, personally, I love it. Like I said, I worked for 10 years at the Arena Stage, which arguably was one of the best theaters in the country. And I found that, like when I I taught directing and acting at the New School, and I would take my directing teachers to the Metropolitan Museum to see Rodin's sculpture, the Burghers of Calais. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's an amazing, extraordinary sculpture, huge, bigger than life size, of these 8 or 9 men, all in chains, looking in different directions. And I would tell them, now walk around that sculpture and all the way around it, and then look at it and then tell me what you think about it, because that sculpture is telling the exact same story every place you walk around it, but with different viewpoints, with different images, with different feelings, and all of it, everything it is. But so what was so challenging about working it around, excuse me, and I'm talking working around from musicals to, I mean, we did all the King's Men, I did Shakespeare, I did all of these things in the round, and you had to find a way to give your face or give your body to another part of the theater and still make it be organic, if you know what I mean by that. Still make it feel like it was an absolutely necessary move or look or statement or something. I found that absolutely fascinating. I loved it. And coming out of that, I find that I actually prefer that kind of theater opposed to a proscenium sensibility. It's like what loving a shot. If you've got a shot in a film and you've got the camera actually moves around you all the time. That to me is fantastic. I love those kinds of shots. Scorsese uses those a lot too. I was just watching something last night that and you know, you don't want to be conscious of the camera movements. You as an audience, you don't want to be conscious of it. And you as an audience member in the theater, you don't want to be conscious of like I said, you got a huge stage. Let's say it's a proscenium stage, Broadway. You as an audience member can choose to look wherever you want to. Me as a director has to make you look where I want you to look to get the story that I want you to get. Mm-hmm. And complemented by all those other things that are happening on the stage. That is thrilling to me. Just thrilling. That kind of work is thrilling. But you know, working around I find fascinating, and I actually, like I say, I prefer it, and I like it too. What I call a lot of back acting, right? You get your back to the audience. So, what are you saying with that?
Well, yeah, I mentioned this in several interviews with other actors. What I call the European versus American acting styles, and I bring up the old Bergman film, The Virgin Spring. I don't know if you're familiar with it, where Max von Sydow is the knight, and his daughter's been raped and killed, and there's this terrific shot of him by the brook or the stream, and he's grieving, and you only see him from the back, from far away, but you know by the way his body slumps what's happening. Yeah. That would never be done in an American film because you'd have to see the grief and the tears and but Bergman captures so much by having Sydow just this powerful knight just slowly slumping. And yeah, so
I mean, I just watched the end of you know, I can watch The Godfather over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And Godfather Part 2, and we used to talk about it in acting class too. I don't know if you remember that last shot. You got Michael, you know, Pacino, sitting outside in a chair, and the camera just slowly moves in on him, and he's just sitting there staring off into the distance. And we had so many conversations about what is he thinking.
Yeah.
And the beautiful part of it is it's about what we think he's thinking.
Yeah.
That's the stunning part. We don't need to know what he's thinking. You know, he could have been thinking about, you know, getting his shoe shined or something. But that's what's fantastic about, you know, Bergman anyway. He was such an incredible image maker. There was a director I worked with, there were 3 very famous, brilliant Romanian directors. Liviu Ciulei was the oldest, and he was the one that I worked with the most. And he had been an architect in Romania. And then, you know, the revolution happened, and they took his theater away and all of that. I learned so much from him. And I did about 4 shows with him. And that influenced my work greatly because it was so visual. His work was so incredibly visual, and that's what I like about. I mean, you know, one of my favorite times in the rehearsal process is during the tech rehearsals when you're designing the lights, when the lights are being designed, because there's another character. You know, sound, lights, clothes, everything it's all part of a different character and in the storytelling itself. And that's what I like. I like films. You know, it's very nice in television, particularly. You know, with the ultra naturalism of it. But when you get a film or somebody like Todd Haynes or what's his name, who they have real style to their filmmaking. That's thrilling as well, because what it does is it raises you up and out of being naturalistic in the perception of it and actually doing of it as well. And there are actors like that. I find an actor like Anthony Hopkins, right? He's always almost that much bigger than he needs to be, which is wonderful because there's a very theatrical presence that you still believe in a naturalistic setting. All those Hannibal Lecter films, all of that stuff, it was so theatrical. And actually, I had met him when he first was doing Equus on Broadway. I saw that show about 5 times. I loved it. He came to the school and talked, and he was younger man then. But I found his style very fascinating. That's when I teach people, when I teach actors or directors, I'll say to an actor, I say, okay, what actors do you like and why? What directors do you like and why? And if they can't tell me, I say, boy, you got to go out and you got to get out more. And because if you can't say, you know, I like I don't know, pick an actor, but you better know why you like that actor as well. I mean, to me, like somebody like Gene Hackman, right? You always believe what Gene Hackman is doing, no matter what, where, or when. Doesn't necessarily change character all that much, but you always believe that he is living that life, you know. Then you've got somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis. I remember seeing My Left Foot.
Yeah.
That's one of the few things I've seen that I have said, I couldn't do that. Yeah. What he did in that film, I could not do that. It was so extraordinary how he embodied that character. I was blown away by it, just knocked out. But then, you know, it's interesting, you know, being my age now, and I've turned down so many opportunities to do work because I was doing other things or being more interested in making, you know, keeping my marriage working than going off to wherever working. I've sometimes thought, you know, should I have done this and that, but I'm never one for regretting anything. I mean, I have turned down some really great opportunities, but I have a really great life, so there's the trade-off.
You mentioned the Hannibal Lecter, and it got me thinking, have you ever seen the movie Manhunter, Michael Mann's Manhunter, where Brian Cox plays Lecter, and he's only got about 10 minutes. And it's interesting because you talked about theatrical. If I recall, it's been a number of years since I've seen it, but Brian Cox's Hannibal is a more believable serial killer, whereas Hannibal Lecter almost takes it off into that Freddy Krueger realm of you know, unbelievability.
Yeah. But then you got somebody like Hopkins doing it, and you sort of buy it anyway. You know, I mean, it's pretty outrageous. Sitting there eating somebody's brains or something. That's a little much, but great character.
When you got into acting and wanted to be an actor first, was the internal spur for that? Was that a desire to get away from Casey Biggs, or did you actively want to internalize other characters to become more of yourself, in essence?
No, I was never interested in getting away from who I was, because I started at such an early age. You don't even know who the hell you are at that age. I just found that I felt at home on the stage. I felt I would walk in backstage somewhere, even from when I was very young. I would walk in, and there was a thrill to it, a sense of excitement to me. And I was very lucky to have people who saw me at a young age and sort of steer me in the right direction. And as I said, you know, studying acting is like, it's all self-analysis. I mean, having been a director and a teacher for a long time as well, you come up against people and you see them very talented but blocked. and they are not willing to go to the place they need to go to in order to tell the story that needs to be told. And I have found that I'm good at getting them to go to that place, because it's about trust. It's all about trust. If you're in a room full of people and you don't trust them, you're not going to be able to be vulnerable at all. And unless a character is vulnerable, even if they are Hannibal Lecter or whatever, you're not going to care about them. So I was very lucky to be led at a very early age to the right kind of training and mentors, I would say.
I want to get back to what you had stated about talent and craft, and this is something that in the arts and going to writing groups and whatnot, I often tell younger artists and writers is that it's often very difficult for people to recognize real talent, much less the craft, because if you see someone like LeBron James and he's 20 years old and he's a basketball prodigy, you can see, oh my God, this guy can run, he can dunk the basketball. The physical movements are much more obvious to see. When you encounter, let's say, a great young acting talent in some acting class or wherever you're teaching, what are the things that stand out to you in a young actor that said, this person could really, really be something special?
Yeah, I just encountered this very recently, because I went to see a community theater production in the place where we live of Brighton Beach Memoirs, right, and Neil Simon piece. And the young kid in that, who was the lead, was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that he was not commenting on anything. I believed him in the situation. He had a great sense of timing, and he was very funny, and I think instinctually made very interesting choices. I don't even know if he knows what making a choice means. But I went up to him afterwards. I said, "You were really, really terrific. I mean, I thought you were just great." I don't think he didn't know what to say, but when you get see somebody like that, and you see them comfortable in their skin, for one thing, and being able to rhythmically, both emotionally and physically, be able to dance with the material, then you got something special there. I think. So I hope this kid really decides to do something. Because let's say, when I was that age, and this kid was about 16, maybe 15, 16. If I had people who were supportive of me at that age, I don't know if I would have done it. I would have stayed in Toledo and done who the hell knows what. As it is, I've traveled the world, and I've breathed the rarefied air with rarefied people. And so I was very lucky. Very lucky.
The thing with acting is, I think, sticks subliminally oftentimes in the percipient, the audience's mind. Just recently, for example, when I get home from work, sometimes I'm having lunch and I'll turn on the TV, but most of the stuff nowadays I just really don't like. But there's a television network that runs repeats called Decades TV, and I saw the old Mary Tyler Moore show, and I saw a couple of episodes, and I was like, God damn, the writing in Mary Tyler Moore in the first few seasons especially was just so much better than the typical predictable sitcoms of today. And I remember going back 45 or so years to being a child on Friday or Saturday nights watching an episode. I remember that show, and I hadn't seen it for 30-something years. And how effortlessly someone like Mary Tyler Moore was so great at what she did. I mean, it's not Medea, but it's still, she was so good at what she did, and her performance, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, boy, she was really good. And I could see the way she would react with Ed Asner or Ted Knight and whatnot, and just right on the beat. Do you ever get those feelings when you watch your own work, or someone you have worked with and see them in a film that you're like, man, that takes me back, and it's because of the performance?
Well, you have to also realize that she she was weaned by the greats, Dick Van Dyke and all those guys that worked on his show when she was first started. I mean, that was an amazing training for her, and also, as you say, the writing was genius. But yeah, I think I've had more of that sense with the stage work that I've done, both on the stage and off the stage, where I felt I emulated that kind of work. See, that's another thing when I talked about a little bit earlier about training other artists. I mean, you have to say what kind of work do you want to do? I mean, I just saw a thing on it was some CBS Sunday Morning about Mel Brooks. He's 4 or 5 or something, and the early work that he did, it was astounding because he knew he was a comic. He knew he was a comic writer. He knew that's what he kind of did. Maybe you like Blazing Saddles, maybe you hate it, but you can't say that it isn't some kind of a craft of some sort. I mean, I think Picasso said one time, and I loved, he said, the worst thing anybody can say about your art is that it offends no one. And I sort of lived by that,
And it's interesting you bring that up because I've often said to people that I hate it when critics, because I write criticism of literature and movies and whatnot, and I really hate it when when a critic will say something like, I like this or did not like that. Try to be objective. Tell me what's, because there are bad movies that I love, that good schlock. And then there are some Bergman films that don't move me, but I'm like, God damn it, that's good. Persona, for example, is a movie that doesn't get to me emotionally, but I mean, this is just Ingmar Bergman at his absolute height, saying, "I'm Ingmar Bergman, you're not," and dick waving and saying, "You try to top that,"
It's like Cries and Whispers,
Yeah.
But I think you're right too that in today's society with this social media and all of that, everybody's a critic for one thing. But most people don't realize that criticism, you need to train to be a critic. You have to know how to have a critical eye. And John Simon just died, by the way.
Oh, really?
Who was you knew who John Simon was? Yes.
Yeah. And he was at least 90, I'd say.
Oh yeah, but he was a vicious critic. I mean, he eviscerated people. I mean, I don't think that's a great thing to do. But then you've got some really great critics like Kenneth Tynan. Was a great critic. He knew how to talk about literature. He knew how to talk about stagecraft and playwriting and all of that, and what makes something good. You can't just get up one morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to be a critic." It's like me saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a national NBA player," right? That's what it cracks me up about people thinking they can act. I'm a football player, so therefore I'll go be an actor.
Yeah.
I was in a movie called Broken Arrow with Howie Long, big football player. Yeah. They wanted to turn him into a big action hero, but he wasn't. He's not an actor. Very nice guy, but wasn't an actor. But it's just funny to me that people think, "Oh, I can do that." If you can't pound a nail, you can't build a house.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a writer too, once told me that he thinks the reason everyone thinks they can be a writer or a poet is that, "Oh, I've got a pen, I've got paper, I can write," and you have to have, as you've implied and stated, you have to have, first off, the wherewithal. You have to have the will to do it. And I say this to many people: you have to have the will. If you want to write or if you want to be an artist, you have to keep at it. You can't be a part-timer at it, and you have to make sacrifices for that art.
You can't be a dilettante. That's for sure. And there's a lot of them. I mean, it takes blood, sweat, and tears on top of craft. I keep coming back to the craft. I tango dance. I love to tango dance. You can't really tango unless you keep going back to the basics. Well, I'm a musician. You keep going back to the basics. So it's just interesting when you sort of, there's sort of a Nietzschean sensibility of the times of life, right? The first third of your life is known as the like you're a camel. You get down on your knees and just education, just fill me up, fill me up, fill me up. And then the second third of your life is the camel going into the desert to become a lion, to sort of try to deal with life. The third part is the lion killing the dragon of thou shalt. So you get to the point of, that's sort of where I'm getting to right now, is that I don't thou shalt anything. There's no need for me to prove anything. I don't, somebody else telling me you should do this, no. The moment you can drop the scales of thou shalt off of your eyes, then you can have a peaceful life. And hopefully still be useful and still be of service and still be an artist and a creator.
Yeah. I had mentioned sacrifice, and earlier you had talked about turning down some roles to have a good marriage and whatnot. What other sacrifices have you made for your art? Do you regret any of them?
No, there's a few things I regret I didn't do, but I get to the point and I say, well, you have to investigate the reasons you didn't do them and then what came of that. To me, in terms of like relationship or work, the job's going to be over and the relationship's not. So you have to decide what's going to be important or not to it. And do you have to inherently be a selfish human being in order to be an artist? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation to have. Because it's a difficult thing. Because a lot of people, I mean, I say to my wife, I say, you don't, she would not like it if I was a much more successful actor than I am right now, or an artist. Because being in the public eye is not a terrific thing. And for those people who want to be in it, they don't really know what they're talking about. And again, we live in this society where it's easy to get on YouTube or with this and that become a sensation or whatever. But I have this young girl singer whose parents were good friends of mine, who's probably the number one. Billie Eilish, her name is. She's very, very, very famous 17-year-old singer right now. And to try to deal with that kind of fame at that age is mind-boggling to me. I mean, having been on Star Trek, just going to the Star Trek conventions and all that, it's fascinating enough as it is. I'm pretty soon going to be on a cruise with 3,000 Star Trek fans. And, you can't get off the boat. You're there. And for most part, I enjoy it a lot, but it's an enormous amount of work. I keep saying that, I keep thanking Gene Roddenberry because it's the gift that keeps on giving, having been part of the Star Trek world. And I just want to shout out to, bless his soul, Rene Aubergenois passed away yesterday. He was a good friend, and he was a great, great actor. And he left the world yesterday.
I didn't even see anything online about that.
It's all over the place. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, he was late 70s and he had cancer. He went on his own terms, which is good. Talk about an actor. There are actors like Rene, who did all those Altman films and all that, and another buddy of mine, Alfred Molina. I mean, those are extraordinary careers, right? Because you go from playing Doc Ock to being Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway to playing all these extraordinary characters. Or you get stuck into a thing like, Tom Cruise, where you have to spend your whole life staying Tom Cruise, So I have been fortunate to actually have played the leading man and to be able to play all these other parts as well. But I do say if I had started directing at an early age, I probably would have stayed as just a director. But I had a teacher at school, at Juilliard, said, "How are you going to make so much money as an actor? Don't even think about being a director." I wish I hadn't listened to him, but here we are.
Oh, is that a dog behind you?
I got two dogs.
Okay, so that's the squeaking sound, because I was hearing things. I guess he's chewing on little rubber things.
Yeah, he was chewing on it. I was going to wait for a break to get up and take it away from him. But,
Okay. I wanted to pick up on some of the threads we were speaking of in the last few minutes. And I've often said to young writers that art is about translating reality. Whether you are a painter, whether you are a filmmaker, whether you are a writer, whether you're an actor, whether you're a dancer, a sculptor, you have this idea maybe a vision. You have this story, as you mentioned, wanting to tell, and you want to bring part of this across decades or sometimes centuries. Whether if you're doing Thomas Mallory or if you're doing Homer, and this gives you a piece of reality that someone can experience anew after however many years have passed between the creation and what it is. How do you define art and then acting specifically as an art?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because depending on what your role is in it, and I don't necessarily mean your role as an actor. I mean your role, either the actor, the director, the writer, whatever. Your part of that story is different, depending on what your function is. You have a writer, be it Tennessee Williams or David Mamet or whoever. They are inspired to tell a story. Then you have a director. The director has to sort of have to say something about. First of all, have to understand what the story is that the writer wants to be told, and then take that story and then envision it in a way where you've got anywhere from 300 people involved in it, that you have to wrangle into one cogent, coherent story telling. And then as the actor, you are a piece of that puzzle. Because if you, as an actor, if you try to encompass or play the whole story in your character, you're doing the play and the piece and you and everybody else a disservice. You have to know what your role is in it, and not, as I say, not literally the role, but what your role in the story is. The antagonist, the protagonist, whatever. I had the good fortune of doing the American premiere of Derek, the Odyssey. Was Derek Walcott's version of the Odyssey.
Oh yeah, Homeros.
Yeah, and Derek was, he was a Nobel Prize winning poet, and he wrote the Odyssey in iambic hexameter. Now, iambic hexameter, if you know or don't, it's 12 beats to a line. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum.
Yeah.
We speak today in our language pretty much iambic pentameter, which is 10 beats to a line. So, which is again, I'm getting a little technical, but it's, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong. So to do a 3-hour play in iambic hexameter, where every single line is 12 beats to a line, you have to have the ability to not only know how to do that, but you have to have the talent to be able to have that sound like it's coming out of a human being's mouth, right? I mean, for instance, there was a beautiful line, and that sea beat me with everything that it had. Well, that's 12 beats to a line, right? But then to think about 3 hours of that and how to make that feel organic was a real challenge, and it was a terrific production. Got really great reviews, but you're up against something that is inherently not realistic, right? And here you have an audience anywhere from, we did it at the arena stage, anywhere from school age to 80, 90 years old, what their relationship to this material is, and then make them try to experience the story, which is a huge, gigantic, iconic story of a man. And what Derek, I think about him a lot. He died a few years ago. The thing that he was, what only a poet can bring this to. I was talking to him one time, and he said to me, he said, what you really must understand is that this is a simple story of a man trying to go home. That's all it is. All of the Odyssey is about a man trying to go home. That is, you can hang that on anything. You got the Cyclops, you got all of those different things that this guy has gone through. He's just trying to get home. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to whittle down whittle it down to something that simple, and every single thing you do, whether it's Thomas Mann or anybody, say, this is X, Y, and Z. Then you can really do the work. And as an actor and a director, I try to do that with everything. This is about trying to go home. This is about trying to find love. This is about whatever, you know. And that's, again, I'm getting down into, you know, technique and craft and what you do with that kind of stuff. But I find that I'm much more fulfilled when I try to grapple with the things that are much bigger than I am. Whether it be story or language, or when you talk about heightened language, I taught a whole class of heightened language. You know, Shakespeare's heightened language because it's Ivic, whatever, but all poetic stuff is called heightened language. It means that you have to, you know, to me, you have to go up to the language. Don't put the language down to you. I want to see you, if you're going to play Hamlet, I want to see you climb up to Hamlet. I don't want to see you pull Hamlet down onto your, you know, mundane self. You have to be. And what you have to remember too, these people are all smarter than we are. I love that. That's another technique too. Your characters are always smarter than you are, and that challenges you to get out of the muck. There's an awful lot of muck these days we have to get out of.
Well, that brings up a point I've made to several people I've interviewed about arts, actors, and other people, is that one of the things in modern society here, contemporary society as we speak now in the year 2019, is this politically correct idea that art is about asking the questions. And I say, let me tell you, Herman Melville didn't write fucking Moby Dick because he didn't have answers. This guy lived. He knew. He saw. He has the answers. And if you don't get the answers from a great work like Moby Dick, don't blame Melville. That's not his fault. And so you seem to be saying a similar kind of thing, is that some great artists, and it could be a Cassavetes, it could be a Bergman, it could be a Melville, that they have, whether it's Persona or Moby Dick, or, you know, if it's Kurosawa in one of his great films, they have put that on the plate for you, and you have to decide what you do with it.
Yeah, and I think you have to be, as like you said, we talked about writing. You tell me just because you got a piece of paper and a pen, you can't be a writer. I think, you know, you can't be a writer unless you're a reader.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Unless you're a reader, and then the lightning that strikes with somebody like Melville. I mean, and that I had the opportunity twice to do Moby Dick rehearsed. You know that piece? It was a piece that Orson Welles wrote for himself.
Oh, okay.
So you can imagine what that was like. And I was in it, and then I directed it again, and it's just an exquisite thing. But to dive into that book is to dive into humanity. You know, is to design. You know, when I talked about distilling it down to one, one phrase or something, with that piece, what I did was that I got to the point where we always and forever will be chased by that white whale.
Yeah.
Now, because of that, I can create a whole production just on that phrase, and but there are people who are plugged in like that. I think Sondheim is plugged in like that. I think Mamet is plugged in certain ways like that. The early Tennessee Williams was like that. Odette's, you know, if you're talking about American stuff, Shakespeare obviously was plugged in a way that nobody has. I mean, nobody has expressed the human condition greater than Shakespeare ever, and that's why you can do these productions over and over and over and over again, and see them over and over again, and work on them. It tells you. It's like, what's his name? That great philosopher writer. He wrote. He basically says Shakespeare invented the human condition. You know, I mean, the invention of the human. I mean, he goes through all of Shakespeare's plays, and it's thrilling to be able to have engaged in that at an early enough age where it could actually help form me as a human being. You know, and I'm a little sad at the state of things now, because it does not. You want to know something, you go Google it, and you get a little piece of something. You don't really understand the why, and the where that it came from. But it's also thrilling that we have all this information available to us.
Well, in that vein, I've often said, to young writers, say, you want to learn about writing, go to Project Gutenberg.
Yeah.
I mean, I've probably read about 20,000 works on Project Gutenberg out of the 60,000 just in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's like these young kids. I said, do you realize when I was a kid, I would have to go to the library. I might have to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get a single book, and then have to read it within 2 weeks, or face a fine.
Yeah.
You can go to but they wanna watch the YouTube videos of some 14-year-old girl giving makeup tips.
Yeah, and that's why they say, okay, boomer now. Okay, boomer. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Go ahead. I used to walk to school in the
Yeah.
I used to walk to school in the I used to walk to school through shag carpeting.
Yeah.
But it's I always say too that we grew up in an age where I remember reading when I was a kid this book called Colossus, is about a supercomputer.
Oh
I was
yeah,
thrilled.
the Forbin project that became, the film.
Yeah, and that I heard years ago a philosophy of, and I believe this, that man's progress is directly correlated to how he charts himself in space.
Hmm.
And if you go back and look, back in the early Roman or Greek days, whatever, or when we thought we were the center of the universe, there was a certain philosophy, religion, science, technology. And then when all of a sudden they went, Galileo or whatever, said, oh no, wait a minute, we're moving around something. All of a sudden there was a huge leap in philosophy, religion, technology. And then when all of a sudden we realized, no, wait, we're in a galaxy. Then there was another huge leap of that. And it's really fascinating, because you can gauge our progress as a civilization by how we chart ourselves in space. Now, if you take that philosophically, personally, yourself too, where are you in space, in a mental space, or philosophical space, or physical space, or whatever it is? Then you can have, I think the meaning of life is trying to affect and to be affected by things. And you can do that in great, huge, gigantic ways, and very small, minute ways as well. And we live in life and times that sort of allows us to do that. I am very, very fortunate. I have an extraordinary life, and I have an extraordinary physical place that I am, and I have an effect on my community and my society, and fortunate enough to be able to do that. And I'm intellectually curious enough to keep going all the time with that, and I think one needs to be grateful for that kind of thing,
Regarding art and acting, though, I've often said to people, I personally don't think life has a meaning. But the interesting thing is that you or we, as agents in the cosmos, can give meaning to ourselves. And I said,
Right.
that's like, fuck Superman. That's the biggest superpower you can have, to give meaning to your existence.
Yeah, as you as you say, excuse me, so rightly, and I agree with it, that there is no meaning. No, nothing has meaning. Why does this green paper that we have in our wallet have meaning? Only because we say it does. That's all. Because you and I agree that this thing is worth $10 or $50 or $100, whatever. So the more, my wife is on this thing right now too. She only wants to keep things around that elicit joy in her, right? So well, is that piece of clothing elicit joy in you? Or is that, that tchotchke over on the thing over there elicit joy in you? That's an interesting way to look at it, because then you surround yourself with stuff that actually literally affects you in a positive way. And my point being is that only stuff that you give meaning to. Right. We got a big house here. We got a lot of stuff, but almost every piece of stuff in this is a personal thing. Right? I have 4 guitars. I don't need 4 guitars, but each one of those guitars, means something to me and has a different particular use for me, right? Um, Instead of just accumulating stuff and junk and all of that, because at this time of our life, it's about trying to what don't I need? What don't I need anymore? And
Well,
you pull the onion, like what's his name, Peer Gynt. You pull the onion skins away.
it's interesting because my wife is also a writer and an artist, and she's more of the typical, I guess, Sylvia Plathian, Sturm und Drang. But I am in accord with someone like Bergman, and even you mentioned Woody Allen, in that you don't want to wallow in it, but there is worth in ugliness. There is worth in dolor. There is worth in being not happy and peppy all the time. To be reflective and to look at things, because life is not all happy and peppy.
Well, I mean, what you're getting at, which is what I completely agree with, because I'm a huge Power of Myth fan, and Joseph Campbell says, it's about joyful participation in the sorrows of the world. Now, you can't even say it more poetically than that. Joyful participation in the sorrows of the world. Because if we can engage that way, then we can live a meaningful life, I think. I mean, we have these. I was hugely into Joseph Campbell for a while because he's a mythologist. And this mythology. All storytelling is about mythology as well. These myths, these stories are in our faces daily, and unless you know mythology, you can't be conscious of that. You don't even know, what the Tristan and Isolde myth is about, or the Greek gods or the Norman gods, and why they were there and why we needed them. I mean, going through the whole Odyssey when I was playing Odysseus, the concept of what these gods meant to these people, and as I always say, we create God in our own image, and when that God stops working for us, we create another God. So it just keeps going and going. But I think that's a profound thing to contemplate is joyful participation in the sorrows of the world.
So Casey, let me just pick up and ask, how do you judge a character or a script when you get it? Your agent comes to you, sends you a script. They said, whether it's for stage or for television, and says, Casey, you're going to be, I think you can really do this a lot. How do you get a handle of it and say, nah, I'm going to pass, or, oh, yes?
Well, that's interesting, because I find that in the past number of years, I've passed a lot more than I have accepted. And a lot of that has to do with how and where I want to spend my time, which says something about, I don't know what it says something about. But I was just, they were interested in me for a brand new play in New York by Richard Greenberg, who's a great, great writer. And it was January, February, and March, and I had one conflict for a Star Trek convention for 1 week, and on the cruise, and they were paying me more money in that 1 week than I would have made in the 4 months in the play. And I decided, I said, well, okay, what am I, an artist, or am I a prostitute? I took the money this time around because I didn't really want to be in New York in the winter, which is where it was going to be. But when you find it, I've been, again, very fortunate enough to been offered or considered for really very profound characters. Elmer Gantry being one of them, a musical version of Elmer Gantry. It's a Wonderful Life. Jimmy Stewart partner, It's a Wonderful Life. Jack Burton and All the King's Men. I mean, just really parts that are delicious. And those things were not very difficult to say yes to right away, immediately. The problem is right now, if you offered me, Macbeth somewhere, I would have to think, well, how long is it? Where is it? How much money is it? All of that kind of stuff. When I was young, I didn't think about any of that. I just give me the part. Let's go for it. Let's do it. And the reason I'm sort of interested in on the acting part of it anyway is in film and television because it's a much shorter amount of time. If I go do a play, you're 2 to 6 months or even longer in something like that. And then also, it's interesting too. You get to be old enough and good enough that you should play the great roles, the great parts, and you have to decide if you really want to go there emotionally. I'm very interested in King Lear lately, maybe directing it, but I mean that's a huge thing. Whether I would want to do it or whether I'm sort of interested in more directing it now because as I said, when you're a director, you get to play God. You can, you have to talk 50 different languages, and you have to be an architect and an artist and all this other lighting designer. Everything, you have to be a choreographer, all the rest of it. That fascinates me, and I'm very interested in sculpting this cultural landscape. Right now, here in my own community, I'm involved in raising an enormous amount of money to build a performing arts center that I would run. But again, the older I get now, I think, wait a minute, I sort of like my life the way it is. We travel a lot, we see a lot, we do a lot. My time is my own. Do I want to spend the rest of my life raising money? Which is basically what you have to do when you're trying to do something like that. I'm doing a lot of music too right now. I'm actually going in January. Recording a new album, and I find that really satisfying as well. But we all actors particularly like to be asked to the dance. What I say to people is, I really like to be asked to the dance. I don't necessarily always want to go dance, but I like to be asked. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting place to be in your life where you can still get asked to the dance, and you can either choose to do it or not. I just wrote and starred in a short film called Heart of Paradise. Yeah, beautiful film. It's a 30-minute film. It's now at a couple of networks that they may want to turn into a whole, TV movie length version, and I would like to do that as a writer and as an actor. I did 2 or 3 independent films in the past year or so. I find that interesting too because you're not constrained by anybody's pocketbook or money. You don't really make any money, but it's a passion project. Doing that as well. So whenever I'm sort of, I've got an Irish background and I get depressed, and I think, what the hell am I depressed about? I mean, look at your life here. I like to quote, what's his name? He says, just get over your bloated nothingness. I think that's a good way to think about it, particularly when you're as fortunate as I am.
You mentioned this passion project. I talked with some other actors about doing indie films. Obviously, you're a member of the Actors Union. I would assume Actors Equity and also for film and television.
Yeah.
Do you have to get a waiver to do an indie film?
Yeah. I mean, it's if you're producing it, you just have to get a waiver to, if it ultimately sells, you make money then that way. But, usually they don't.
Well, let me talk about how you judge other actors. You've mentioned some great roles and great actors. I've often thought that in America, I mentioned earlier the European versus, well, I should say really world cinema versus American cinema, the differences that I've noticed, and that is that here in America, acting tends to be oftentimes when you are up for an Emmy or an Oscar, that it's always the real melodramatic crying, the clashing moments. Whereas I found, I think the best acting moments are the subtle little moments, oftentimes in what are the bridging scenes. I think it might have been John Huston who said every great film has 5 or 6 great scenes, and then the rest is just bridging. And I think some of the best moments that actors have given are in those little bridge scenes between the obviously, dramatic moments. And I'm just wondering, what is your take on something like that?
Well, you look at, what was that? What's her name? She was in Shakespeare in Love. She got an Academy Award.
Gwyneth Paltrow.
5 minutes or something like that.
Oh, okay, the other one. Okay, yeah.
She played the Queen.
Okay, yeah. I know him.
Um,
Yeah.
Again, it's a difference of it's a difference of genres because film and television is just a series of moments strung together. Boom, 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 boom. You know, you don't have to think about how do you arc. What is an arc to a whole performance?
Mhm.
I remember being in a session, an editing session, a TV thing, where they took a scene that the actor had not even. They took a scene from a different episode, some takes from a different episode, and put them in that episode because they didn't like what the actor was doing. It wasn't even. It had nothing to do with what he was doing. So that's what I really realized, that it's not an actor's medium. Television is not particularly an actor's medium. But when it comes to, we as a society, we like melodrama. We like big, we like, it's like, My Left Foot. The guy couldn't walk, he could paint with his feet, whatever. That's a dramatic thing. The thing that I find interesting about awards is that you like the Golden Globes. There's what, 70 foreign writers who come up with the Golden Globes, and they give the awards for that. I really don't put a lot of stock in that. I mean, and it's a money game anyway. It's such a big money game. How you get your film seen, how you get your film distributed. And I always say that if people talk about the money actors make, if you are in my movie, and I know because you're in my movie, I will make $150 million. You are worth $25 million. So I have no problem with Russell Crowe or whoever it is getting $25 million to do a thing, because if you're in that film and people are going to see it, then everybody's going to make the money. I personally, I'm not in that situation. I'm a solid, actor's actor. I'm a solid journeyman actor. But I think that I have no problem with people, Tom Cruise making that kind of money, because they're going to sell the film and the film's going to be seen. I don't like actors being taken advantage of. I don't like anybody being taken advantage of. But when it comes to that level of thinking, you have to. I mean, I've been involved in those high-end things with my manager and stuff, and I put that in a different place than when I put my passion projects on. Or, like I said, I don't really like to go just anywhere to act now. I'll probably pretty much go anywhere to direct something. I'm so fascinated and passionate about that. I will go spend the time to do that. There again, if it's a play, I'm there for 4 weeks, not 3 months. And I've also found that whether it's film or stage, the process is what fascinates me. Writing, that's the process. So if I work on a piece, for 4 months, or maybe 4 weeks, and as an actor, I love the process. And then when I do 2 or 3 or 4 performances, I feel like, okay, I'm done with it. I don't need to do it anymore. But then you've got another 6, 8, 10 weeks to have to do it. So that's when I realized I really like the concept of the process of the art. When I go to museums or I see great works of art, I think there was a singular moment when that brush was put to that canvas, or the singular moment when that word, when Robert Penn Warren, wrote that particular word in that particular sentence. That to me is fascinating. It's just fascinating. Like we make wine too. I make wine. Same kind of thing. Making wine. What a fascinating process that is. It's writing music. What a fascinating process that is. I love to work with wood. I make tables and stuff like that. And I love the process of doing it. I probably would have been much more successful and wealthier if I could have followed through the process much more, because I've conceived and done a lot of work that after they were done, I wasn't interested in sort of promoting them anymore. So that's my fault.
How do you approach a scene that you have to do? What percentage is modeled on your own personal past life experiences, and what percentage is you just sort of free-forming and imagining?
Well, that's a good question, because I think everything to be any good at all has to be personalized. I mean, that's one of the first lessons of acting. How do you personalize a situation? How do you personalize any words that you say? How do you personalize your surroundings? Um, there's an old story that Jimmy Stewart was complaining supposedly to Olivier, Laurence Olivier, but everybody was complaining that he was always playing himself. He never was, what kind of an actor? You're always playing yourself. And Olivier turned to him and said, "Well, dear boy, you're always playing yourself with deference to the character." And that always made a lot of sense to me because, you don't become someone else. It's how talented you are at what's a good word? It's not becoming as embodying that persona. I played killers on film. I played doctors. I played lawyers. Of course, I'm not going to go out and kill anybody to know what it's like to kill somebody, but there I can find something in myself that is equates to that kind of drive or need or whatever. Hmm. And then it comes up to you how, so I go back to that beginning of our conversation. Relaxation, concentration, imagination. You have to be able to relax enough to concentrate and then imagine what happens. And then free enough to do it. So the answer to the question is you always start from yourself. Always, always, always. And then it's how good it is you are at pretending. We were kids, we played, cops and robbers, Indians, whatever the heck you played in your kids. That was full bore commitment. And you can't do any of the kind of work we are talking about without knowing how to commit as well. If you're afraid to commit, you'll never be as good as you could be.
During the course of our conversation, Casey, you mentioned probably 5 or 6 different roles that you had on stage. Can you first off tell me maybe the 3 or 4 roles that were the most satisfying for you on stage, why they were, and then if there was a role or 2 that maybe you weren't satisfied with, was it because of the way it was produced? Was it because of your co-star? And you don't have to mention names. Or was it because of just the writing that over the course of doing it, you found it wasn't what you initially thought?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, as I said, to play some really great parts. And I think a lot of the reason, if I felt I was successful in them, is because I think the directors were so good. I've been blessed to be able to work with really brilliant directors. In case, for instance, as I mentioned, Leave You Chule. It was a production of, it was Time of Your Life, which is a Soroyan play, very, interesting, odd play, incredibly satisfying. I did a production of, I did a number of productions with a director named Doug Wager, All the King's Men being one of them. That was an incredibly successful, satisfying piece of work and translation from literature onto the stage. I originated Elmer Gantry in the musical Elmer Gantry that we played in Ford's Theater. I mean, and I was on, that was at such a poignant time. I don't think poignant is the right word for it, but that's right when remember Jimmy Swaggart? Remember Jimmy Swaggart? Yeah. Where he dropped his trowel, he got caught. Jim Baker, same thing. And then here I was playing Elmer Gantry, who was, the liturgical embodiment of them. And I found myself on the cover of the Los Angeles Times with those other 2 guys. There was a story about Baker, a story about Swaggart, and a story about me, all on the front page of the art section of the LA Times. And I was on what's that guy's name? That big interviewer. Who's a famous interviewer? Was on the radio. What's his name? He wears the glasses and the suspenders. What the hell's his name? Right?
I might, but
I'll get his name. Anyway, I was on his show because I was playing Elmer Gantry, and then you had the whole. I performed that for. I get Ronald Reagan was in office. He came to see it. When you're in the zeitgeist of society that way with works of art, then you're fortunate. I did a really successful production of Taming of the Shrew that I was very proud of. Um, and then my directing things, I'm very pleased with a lot of those. But I can't say that there has been a lot that I did a production of, a restoration play called The Way of the World, which I wasn't too happy with but I blame not only myself, but I blame the director a little bit. In the end, I said, you should have made me better than I was, because I don't like to act when I have an eye on myself, because I have the tools and I have the ability. I could have done anything you wanted. I just felt that they should have known more about that.
Is a director a good director to use someone who kicks you with the spurs, or does it depend on what the project is and who you're working with?
I think the director, to me, I want to work with a director that's going to make me better than I could be by myself. I have no time, place, or patience for a director who is abusive at all, because I know what I respond to, and I know the kind of director that I am myself, and I know how to get the rights to get out of it. I mean, a director's talent has to be even more than an actor's talent, because not only the director, if you got 10 people in a cast or 30 people in a cast, you have to be able to speak 30 different languages, because not everybody speaks the same language. I mean, not literally, metaphorically, I'm talking about. And then my big talent is to be able to get you to think it was your idea to do what's going on. Yeah. And because that's ultimately when it's the best.
Well, that's what I often say with writers, is that the power of writing is that imagine, for example, you have that iconic image of Marilyn Monroe, but suppose you don't know who Marilyn Monroe was, but I'm writing a description of Marilyn Monroe, and I can write as meticulous a description as I want, but your Marilyn will ultimately be a little bit different than the guy next to you's Marilyn. And now it'll be the same words, but you will co-create and develop. And you don't know who Marilyn Monroe is, but your Marilyn will look different than his, and it'll be different than the real Marilyn.
And what you're going at is the essence of what Marilyn was.
Yeah.
So that I can create it in my imagination.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned Robert Penn Warren. My wife is reading All the King's Men now. I said, you should really read that, because I did it however many years ago. And this man is a true wordsmith. I mean, he's an extraordinary writer. And he was a poet as well. But I think the greatest artists are the ones who have that ability to plug into what it is you and I, can imagine, will experience. I mean, it's like when people talk about what makes you laugh, what makes anybody laugh, comedy, is because you recognize yourself in that thing. You recognize yourself in that joke, in that whatever, that situation. And you have to ask yourself too, when's the last time you really laughed out loud? Can you remember really laughed out loud? Sometimes it's a little tough sometimes to find those moments. It's the things that surprise you too that are the greatest. Remember in Forrest Gump, and Tom Hanks is on that shrimping boat. And he's coming in, he's going along, and he sees on the deck Lieutenant Dan in the wheelchair. Yeah. And he just sees him, he says, Lieutenant Dan, and he just runs off the boat and falls into the water. That to me is the perfect example of what comedy is. There's a need and an objective and a want that is so powerful that nothing gets in your way. And what happens? You fall off the boat, or you fall down the manhole or something. It's just that kind of stuff fascinates me. That gets into a sort of the science of what that kind of stuff is. But
well, let me just pick up on that, because I've asked this question a number of times, and since you mentioned Woody Allen earlier, Allen has a famous saying that he says that for him, doing drama is sitting at the grown-ups table, Whereas other people say that comedy is much more difficult than drama. How much comedy have you done, and what is your take on comedy versus drama? Which is harder?
Oh, I love it. I personally think I'm a really funny guy. But I keep telling my manager, I'm a funny guy. You got to tell him. Well, you've seen those Paso Wine Man videos,
Yeah, I
right?
was going to get into that next. Yeah.
That's comedy.
Yeah.
That's comedy in a way that's a very different kind of, it's not slapstick stuff.
Yeah.
But comedy is about timing. It's
Yeah.
about timing, and it's about ironic comedies even more. I'm reading this interesting book now called The Age of Wit. It's not interesting to many people, but it's about the age of wit in the 16 and 1700s.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because back in those times, how witty you were had a lot to do with where you were positioned in society. The wittier you could be, the higher up in society you were. I'm not much one from really crude kind of humor. I love that, but I tell you, there's nothing. There's not a higher form than great comedy, I think. And Woody Allen too. I'll see every Woody Allen movie, but something, nothing's as good as those first 6, 7 films he did. Those really hilarious films. But he still gets a chance to do them also.
Well, let me ask about the Paso wine stuff, and it seems like you started about a decade ago, and I saw online maybe about 12 or 15 of them. It reminded me of that commercial, "The most interesting man in the world," although I think he's hawking beer.
I'm like the most interesting wine man in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For anybody who's watching this and you don't know what it is, you just go on YouTube, put Paso Wine Man in. I did 19 of these spots. Actually, more than that, 20, 22, I think, something like that. But the lightning in a bottle with that was originally I was approached to look at this first script that they had, and I just said I can't have anything to do with that because it's not funny and it's not. I said I don't think it's what you need. So I was fortunate enough to have a student at the New School who was a writer, who I thought really had that kind of sense of humor. And I told him, I said, this is what I need. I need something ironic, funny, and informative, and it can't be more than a minute and a half long. And so the next day, he sent me that first one, which was about Zinfandel, that was the whole essence of it, right in that thing. This is not my wife. This is not my. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah.
That one. So that was and so the whole thing, sort of took off on that. Yeah. But that's the kind of ironic, self-aware kind of comedy that I think is fantastic.
Well, it's sort of that fast-paced humor from a Marx Brothers movie, where the jokes just keep on flying.
I know. I used to watch all of those Marx Brothers films, and again, it's very hard to do that because these guys came out of the theater. They came out of vaudeville. They knew what the timing was about, and they weren't afraid. Groucho with a painted-on mustache, and I mean, you think about who are the great comics today that you think are really funny. I MC this big Friars roast here.
Yeah.
And it's a fundraiser, and we roast all these very big winemakers, and I'm the MC of it. So I go back and look at all those roasts, those Dean Martin, roast club things, and they're hilarious. And now they got these roasters ones out now that are just, they're sort of mean and vile, and the dirtier you can be, the better. But I think smart humor is the more difficult thing to do.
Well, yeah, that's why there's not many.
Robin Williams was in my class at Juilliard. I mean, that guy, when we were at school, he wasn't like that. He hadn't honed any of those comic chops that he did. But then, a few years later down the line, when he was right into it, there was nobody better at that because his mind was so fast, and he was also attuned to so many different. He had an encyclopedia of knowledge. If I said, that should be more like the Blue Boy. Well, he would know that who painted the Blue Boy, or he knew about Chekhov and Gorky and Shakespeare, and he could just rip on all that kind of stuff. And I think it just to show you that the more educated you are, the better. It's a little sad that in our top day and age right now that you know being educated is not looked at as a really positive thing. That's pretty frightening.
Well, let me turn to some of your IMDb credits, and I'll go chronologically from the start, and I'll pick out some of the more ones that jump out at me. It looks like in 1985, there's an America's Musical Theater, a TV show. You played someone named Bill Cracker. Was this for PBS?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be in. Actually, there was a series of those, and I was in two of them. That was Happy End. It was a Kurt Weill, Brecht Weill piece, which is fantastic. And they came and saw it, and they said, "We want to shoot this for PBS." So we shot the stage production. Mm-hmm. And then the following year, I was in a thing called The Cradle Will Rock, which was directed by John Houseman. And that, again, John Houseman produced it originally with Orson Welles, who was directing it, and back in the 30s. And we did that, and they decided they wanted to shoot that as well. So that was they did a series of 3 of them, and I think I'm only one that was in 2 of them. That was really great.
Well, I've wondered often why public television hasn't picked up and done, say, like some live theater. It would seem to me that a lot of people will talk about, how live television, was so great. And I think you see some of the old kinescopes, and there's some really terrific stuff there. Rod Serling, Patty Chayefsky are the 2 biggest names to come out of there. But I would just think that public television would be the natural place where you could get and do things. I remember seeing, I think it was John Lithgow in, you mentioned Clifford Odets, what's the one, To the Moon, Rocket to the Moon.
Yeah.
And PBS, I don't know,
it's all a money thing. Yeah, it's all a money thing. I mean, and also plays don't translate to film all that well. There was a production of Our Town not too long ago that a friend of mine directed with Paul Newman was in it. And it started as a play, and because Paul Newman was in it, they wanted to shoot it, which they came and shot it. And I was involved for a little while with a company that was trying to get that kind of a thing going. And it's all about money. It's all about money. And it's very hard to actually shoot a play, because when you're designing a play, you design it to be seen in the place that it's put on. And what was interesting in not all the King's Men, Happy End, that was in the round, right? So they had to figure out how to shoot that with all these cameras in the round, and we had to restage some of it. And but I think you're right. I mean, if you go to Lincoln Center in New York, there's thousands of things that they shoot, because almost every play that I did down there were always filmed, but there was for archival purposes. This is my Lucy here.
Yeah.
Hi, Lucy.
She was the one making the squeaking sounds.
Yeah, with this thing.
I see that you also were on Ryan's Hope for a few episodes.
I was Ryan's last hope.
Yeah.
I was the last contract player on Ryan's Hope.
Oh.
I got on it. I was supposed to be on for 2 or 3 years, and they canceled it like 6 months into the time that I was on it after 25 years.
Yeah.
But that was a great learning place for it. You had to learn how to do 10 pages every day.
Yeah.
As one director said to me one time, he said, "Well, you made a silk purse out of that sow's ear."
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And then I see, you had a lot of episodic television stuff. You even on Melrose Place.
Yeah. Gosh almighty, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Melrose Place. And let's see. Well, I guess before I mentioned the Star Trek role, is there any stuff that was pre-getting the role on Star Trek Deep Space Nine that sticks out, or any actor or any anecdote that you'd like to relate?
Well, with the reason I think one of the reasons I got Deep Space Nine, because I didn't know anything. I knew the first series when I was a kid, and I didn't pay attention to it after that. Mm-hmm. And I tell a story on these Star Trek conventions. I got a call to go in to read for it. All right, so I go in there, and I literally had 5 words. That's what the audition was, 5 words. And I'm sitting there in this room full of 20 guys thinking, what the hell am I doing here? I went to Juilliard, for Christ's sake. You can get an extra to do this stuff. So anyway, I swallowed my ego a bit and went in there. The 5 words are, they're in range, sir, fire. And so I did it, and the guy said, you're going to a room, and there's like 6 or 8 producers in there. He said, well, that was really great. And I'm thinking, who are these people? So I go home. By the time I got home, I got a phone call. Oh, they loved you. They want you to come back again. Oh, man. So I go back the next day. I go in the same people in there. Instead of 20 people, there's five guys, reading for the part. I go in there and say, well, that was really intelligent reading. I'm thinking, who are these people? They're in range, sir, fire. Anyway, so I got the job. Didn't know anything about it. Had 3 hours in makeup. I walked in there. I thought, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I'm sitting at this console pretending like I'm, flying a ship. And the director came over to me and said, they got big plans for this character. And I said, well, don't tell me that. I've got 2 pounds of rubber on my face. I don't know what I'm doing anyway. So the point being is that it went from that 5 lines to 3-4 years later being the leader of the empire. And the whole thing. So it was a wild ride on that Star Trek thing.
Well,
the thing that is interesting to me about that, almost 80% of those people were classical actors that were on that show, because you had to be it's of Shakespearean proportion, that language that you have to spout, that has to sound like it's coming from an intelligent being of some sort. So a lot of these actors were all classically trained theater actors. Rene Auberjonois being one of them, and Armin Shimmerman and Jeff Combs and Mark Alimo and Avery Brooks, and all of these guys. So it was good company to be in.
Yeah.
And up to that point, I had a shot on I wish it had gone further. I got a job on David, what's his name? He did the big lawyer show, famously married to.
David Kelly.
David Kelly show, yeah. I rolled on David Kelly show. It only lasted 6 episodes. I thought, man, I made it. I'm on a David Kelly show now. Yeah. Lasted 6 episodes. So you never know. The thing is, you get a job, you do it, and then go home. Figure that's the last time you're going to do it. I did a bunch of TV movies. I did a bunch of pilots. I was fortunate enough. This was great. One year I was on 2 series at the same time. I was on Star Trek, and then there was another one called Appearances that was shot in Richmond, Virginia. That took place in was it called Appearances? Post-Civil War. And so half of the week I was riding a horse, and the other half of the week I was flying a spaceship. That was flying. I was flying high at that point. So I just fly back across the country doing this work.
Well, it says a TV show named Legacy. Was that
Legacy? Not Appearances, Legacy. Okay. Appearances was a different one that didn't go. Okay. Legacy is what it was called. Okay. that was a beautifully shot thing, but it was on the wrong network, and it was post Civil War. And you got to play all of that stuff. That was terrific.
Well, I wanted to ask, since a lot of people would probably associate you most with the Star Trek world, just to talk about the particular characters in that show. So this is set 100 or so years after the Kirk and Spock stuff, and right directly after the Patrick Stewart Next Generation series. And the thing I found interesting was that you played a character called a Cardassian, and they were these sort of, I guess, reptilian-like space Nazis, as someone once said. Yeah. And as you said, you started out as, I guess, the assistant to the Mark Alimo.
I was like a lackey to Mark Alimo. And
then your character named Damar eventually became like the Chancellor or the Premier or whatever. The Legate. Okay, yeah. And the interesting thing I found was that I think the Cardassians, especially in that show, to me were the most interesting characters, because one of the things about Star Trek, at least post the original series, is I think that the people in the Federation are living in a dystopia, but they don't realize it because they've been narcotized. But the Cardassians are the way humans are now. They're greedy, they're selfish, they're violent and whatnot. Whereas Picard and all of these Federation people are oh, we've got the hollow suite, and we got if I want to screw Marilyn Monroe, I can just go to the hollow deck or whatnot. But the Cardassians are grittier and whatnot, and I found that your character, Alimo's character, and Andrew Robinson's character, who's like a murderer, traitor, spy, Tinker Tailor, were the three most interesting characters. And I've never, it's rare, but I found myself more interested in the secondary characters, and most of them Cardassians, than I was in and I'm not a Trekkie fan. I watch the shows, but I'm not a Trekkie. I'm not going to go to one of those conventions that you mentioned. But I found the Cardassians and a lot of the secondary characters, especially in Deep Space Nine, to be far more interesting and fascinating.
Well, once they made the Klingons good guys, they had to come up with a bad guy.
Yeah.
And so they came up with the Cardassians. And Mark Alimo being the epitome of the Cardassians. I mean, he looks like that, for Christ's sake. And he was great actor at all of that stuff. And they were a great foil for the good guys of the show, right? Because they were smart, they were militaristic. They wrote Mark in a beautiful arc. And I have to say, Andy had a fantastic arc too, because you never really knew which side he was coming down on. Sorry. And then when they came up with my character, if you really watch the arc of that character, it grew and grew and grew and grew, because they liked, they obviously liked what they saw on the screen, what I was doing. And the funny part of it is, my big hero in all of that was Ira Stephen Bear, the executive producer, who was obsessed with the Alamo. I did the iconic. I played the hero in the IMAX version of the Alamo called The Price of Freedom that he had seen, and it only shows in IMAX films. So what I didn't finish with the story, with the audition stories, and little did I know that I had that job the moment I walked in there, because he knew who I was from that Alamo film. And he loved the Alamo, and I've actually taken him to the Alamo, and I've taken him behind the scenes, and because I portrayed William Barrett Travis, and he is a hero to these Texans, William Travis. And if you notice later on in the Deep Space Nine, the last season, there's a whole thing going on between Bashir and Colm Meaney about the Alamo. They have these Alamo game that they're playing, and I told them when I found out that I was going to die in the very last episode, I said I got to have an Alamo death, and they gave me an Alamo death. I took all these people out, and my chest exploded, and I died in somebody's arms, and it was really great. But they were terrific characters, because not only were they weren't like what do you call it, the guys with the pointy ears,
the Vulcans.
Vulcans who had no. I mean, you could see my character completely flipped. Once I realized, I came to my senses. They wrote me a great episode one time where I had this great, what I called my Henry V speech, where I come out of hiding, and we're gonna rebel and all that kind of stuff. So it was a wonderful character to play underneath all of that makeup.
Yeah.
So it was great.
Well, I also see that you had a role on another Star Trek show, Enterprise.
They called me and asked me if I would do that, and I wasn't too keen on getting into makeup again. But they said, "Oh, this is a brand new race. It's going to be a great little character." And I got in, and it was one episode. They never brought him back. It was, an Illyrian captain. That show with what's his name? Who was the star? That was
the guy who's jumping around in time.
Right.
Oh God, yeah, I
Yeah,
blank out.
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Um,
Everybody out there listening knows who we're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. I also see that you did an episode of the X-Files, which is another big sci-fi show from
That
the
was a
90s.
great one. That was a hugely expensive one. I think the episode was called Vietnam, and it was the one where both Duchovny was in it and Patrick. What's his name? Patrick. The two guys. And we shot it on these oil wells off of Santa Barbara, and out in the ocean, and it had something to do with these alien getting into your eyes or something like that. I don't
Uh-huh.
know. But that's a pretty profound episode for me because the very last day of shooting, they had a bunch of bruisers who were extras on that show. And he said, one guy said, "What are you doing tonight?" I said, "Oh, nothing." He said, "I'm bouncing at a bar down in Santa Monica. Why'd you come?" So I said, "Okay." So I show up there. Very, very long story short, that's the night I met my wife. She showed up at that bar. So X Files has a, but it was funny about that. I must have auditioned for X Files 15 times, and they finally, cast me in that one.
I see that you also in 2012 did Othello. Is that a film or a television,
That
PBS?
was it was a web. I was pretty proud of that for the kid because it was one of my directing students did it. It was a webisode
Yeah,
things. They did it in webisodes.
yeah.
Episodes of that, and he wrote it and shot it and directed it, and I did it as a favor, and I was glad I did it for him. So
Now,
I was pleased to do that. It's a very modern version of it.
see also, I remember about a year or two ago, I've interviewed, interestingly enough, you talk about odd little synchronicities. I think you're maybe the 27th or 28th actor that I've interviewed. About a third of the people have at least had an appearance on the soap opera General Hospital. And a couple of years ago, apparently, you had played a character. I remember, was it?
27 years ago.
Well, no, no. You played
No,
Dr. Lazarus.
no, but I was on General Hospital 27 years before that.
Oh, okay, yeah,
28 years before.
1990. Okay, Chad Wainwright.
Yes. So they called me, asked me if I'd do it, and I said, "Oh, it might be fun to go back." And I went back, and there were people who were still there from the 27, 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the casting director for one of them. So I did 2 episodes of that. And it was a fun thing to do. I
Uh-huh.
played some evil doctor or something like that.
Yeah. And then 28 years later, you played a doctor. So you were a doctor in both episodes?
No, Chad. I was a lawyer. I think I was a lawyer
Uh-huh.
originally in that one, wasn't it? The first one, and then this last one, I was an evil doctor.
Yeah. You were gonna lobotomize the Carly character, was it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I tell you, in my, my the character they wrote for me in Ryan's Hope was fantastic.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was an FBI agent whose daughter got shot while he was in his arms because they were chasing somebody with blah blah blah. And I was ultimately going to come back and marry one of the lead characters, but then they canceled the show. But I learned a lot from it. It was really great, really great.
So I want to talk. You'd mentioned you'd done in the last few years a few independent films. Were these student films or were these actual?
Well, these were people who had gone to to film school, I think, and one was called Half Brother, beautiful film, shot in New York, and the other one was called what was it called?
There's Heart of Paradise.
No, that's the one I wrote.
Okay.
The other one was called
Unbelievable.
What's that?
Unbelievable. Is that?
No, that's a scary one. Unbelievable.
Sweet Parents.
Sweet Parents. Sweet Parents. That had been another student of mine that had been out for a few years, and he told me, he said, "I got the script for you." When he just gotten out of school, I said, "Call me when you get funding for it." And so a few years later, he called me, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it for you." Played a wonderful character. It's a beautiful story. I played a Argentinian architect who takes a young woman under his wing in more ways than one. So that was a good film. I like that. It did very well on the circuit too, the festival circuit, as did my film Heart of Paradise.
Before we wrap up totally, I would just have a few other questions that I sometimes ask most of the people that I'm interviewing. yeah, again, you don't have to name names or anything, but what have been some of the negative experiences that you've had? Have they been mostly because of financial things or because of directors? You know, famously Hitchcock thought actors were just sort of marionettes on a string. Uh, or have there been times when you worked with an actor who was just an egotistical hog of screen time and trying, you know, some of the actors who are constantly doing things, fidgeting in the background to get attention?
Yeah, I have to say I haven't had a whole lot of those. I remember one of my early television things. What was it called? The what was it called? It was about a lion country safari thing called The Beasts Are in the Streets or something like that. And I learned a lot then because the guy who was the lead, I can't remember his name, but the guy who played my partner in that was Philip Michael Thomas, who was on
Miami Vice.
Miami Vice, great guy. But the guy who played the lead, that he was, I would kept watching him sometimes, and he was like always by himself and always around, but he was never really nice, you know. To me, an actor, if you're my director, I should make your job easy for you. You know, I should, you know, on particularly on television where you have to get at least 8 to 10 pages a day, right?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of work. And if I'm an actor and I'm a director, I'm going to hire somebody that I know is not going to be difficult because I got a lot of work to do, and that's why you work with the same people over and over because you become to trust them. But I have to say that I have not had a lot of experience where it has been a negative experience, where somebody was trying to, you know, put me down or not give me the space to do what I needed to do. But then again, I feel like I'm pretty good to work with. You know, all you got to do is I have the talent and the ability to do whatever it is you want me to do, but you better know what you want me to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know, then we're all off on our own thing. But I haven't had any big blow-ups or fights or, you know. I mean, I think I've probably been a jerk or an asshole a couple of times when I didn't really mean to be. But to me, it was always for the work. You know, it was always for the art, not because I needed attention or I needed some special something or other. I always try to make the work worth doing.
Art, and especially acting, in some ways is exceedingly personal because you're drawing things out of yourself, either intellectually, emotionally, both, and yet here you are. If you're doing a movie or a television show, and you're going to be seen by millions of people, is there ever a time that you have felt self-conscious about something, or done, or had a scene where you wondered if it was the right way to play it because there were eyes on you, whereas if, let's say, you were in a small theater with only 30 or 40 people watching you, you might interpret that kind of a situation differently?
Not too much. I mean, there was. This is I think a funny little anecdote. I did, you know, Shameless, the TV show Shameless.
Yeah.
Terrific piece. I did a few episodes of that, and one of them is I had to sign a nudity clause, right? Because I'm supposed to have a sex scene. And my wife tells me, she said, "Yeah, well, you know, you better go get your back waxed." I said, "What?" She said, "I think you should do it." I said, "No," she said, "I'm telling you, I think you should do it." So I went in. I'd never done it before. I did it. It was the most painful damn thing ever. 2 weeks before I shot, well, I went to Chicago to shoot it. I get to the set, and my back looked like Vietnam. It was just, you know, it didn't react well. So I went into the makeup guys in the morning. We were on the set at like, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning. And I said, "Guys, we got a problem here." I said, "What?" And I pulled my shirt up, and the guy said, "Oh, my God." I said, "That doesn't make me feel too confident." So he spent about a half an hour putting makeup on my back. Went to the set, playing with this wonderful, lovely actress. And the English director came up to me and said, "Casey, come over. Now, see, that's what I want you to do. I want you to go bang her up against that post. And just pull your pants down so I can see your ass a little bit." I didn't even have to take my shirt off. I mean, that's all it was. I went through all that pain for nothing. And it was great. But then, you know, it's funny because talking about nudity and all that, I've had to do more of that on the stage than I ever had to do I mean, there was a full buck naked thing in the Odyssey where he washes up on a shore and these nymphs go find him. And I knew I had to do that. So about 3 months earlier, I got into the best shape of my life. I looked like a god, because I was like, I'm going to be naked in front of 1,000 people every night. So we did it. First few performances, the director came back and said, we got to give you something to put on. I said, why? He said, because, some teachers saw it and said, they're not going to bring their kids to see it if they do that. I said, man, it looks more obscene with a little diaper on than nothing. So anyway, that was pretty funny.
Yeah,
But I had the shape of my life.
it reminds me, I once saw a version of King Lear where the fool is naked, and the problem was it was a cold theater, and so he was very shrunken, and it just took it, wandering
the edit words, right?
Yeah, yeah. Let me just finally, before I just wrap up and ask you to give any closing thoughts. Is there any role or any kind of role that you could think of that you would not do? And I say this because I've spoken with some actors who are Christians, and they wouldn't do certain things like a drug dealer or a pedophile simply because of their belief systems, I guess. If we playing a serial killer or a Nazi or a pedophile, is it the role? And if it, I mean, there's obviously a difference if you're doing just pornographic stuff, just to show you to be, but if it has some depth and you're doing, if it was a great adaptation of John Wayne Gacy or something, something famous, sicko like that, is there something to say, no, I don't want to do that because of the whole
Well, I have to say, it's not that I shouldn't get into my politics too much, but I was offered a something where I basically was offered to play Trump, kind of a Trumpian character, and I really, I didn't do it because I have such a visceral reaction, but I should have done it because any of those kinds of things where you're playing a Nazi or you're playing I had a friend of mine who played. There was a HBO film about young Marilyn Monroe where the stepfather raped her or something, and my buddy was the one who played it, and we talked about it. And I said, it was hard to do, but there are those kinds of people out there, and the better you can portray them, the more mirror up to nature. You're going to put the mirror up to nature to see these people see who they are. So I don't think there's a lot of things that I would say no to. That was the only thing recently that I could think of, the Trumpian character, because I have such a visceral reaction. I would have to get over that in order to read. But again, Hitler didn't think he was a bad guy.
Yeah,
there was nothing in his mind that he thought he was a bad guy.
Well, there's the old saying that the best villains think they're heroes.
Exactly. It's like Mark Alimo. He never thought he was a Nazi. He got all pissed off when everybody called him a Nazi. Yeah. He thought he was the lead of the show. Yeah. And in his mind, he was. Yeah. But you can always find something in that. So I would be pretty hard pressed to try to find something I would morally not do, because I think, again, these things need to be seen if it's not, just gratuitous.
Yeah, and it's like I know as a writer, I've written a number of works. I grew up in a very Goodfellas-like environment as a kid, where there were mobsters all around. And when I write about some of these incidents, and I've written a number of novels about it, these guys use the N-word. Well, do you think that some mob boss who would order someone dead is going to really think twice about using an epithet? Of course not. And you can't limit that. And some people, they just don't get that. But anyway, so let me just ask in closing, just a couple of things that I asked. Number one, what is any advice that you'd give to younger actors, either business advice, craft advice, or anything else?
Well, the biggest one is that it is a craft, and you got to learn your craft. and find somebody. You got to do some studying. Find some work or people that you respect, or the kind of work that you respect, and go train with them. I mean, I trained with some of the best, and then I spent the past 10 years training people. So it's not something that you can just walk out of your bathtub and do. It is definitely a craft, like writing is a craft, or house building is a craft, or painting. Anything is a craft. And then also, my biggest suggestion to people who are getting out of training itself is don't wait for somebody to give you permission to do your art.
Yeah.
There's no need to wait for anybody to give you permission. See, when I got out of school, there was all kinds of work. There was people were calling left and right. There's not that kind of work anymore. So you have to create your own work. Mm. Whether it's go make your own movie, or go write your own book, or go write your own play, or go put on your own thing, or write your own music, whatever it is. You don't need permission to do your art. Mm. And that is a phrase that I have found very valuable in my work and in my teaching, is that, like if you're doing someplace where you need to be very vulnerable, give yourself permission to be vulnerable. Or give yourself permission to be that angry, or be that happy, or be that destructive, or whatever it is. Because we don't, in our society today, give ourselves permission to do that a lot, because we're so terrified of so many things. Yeah. But I would say that, learn how to relax, concentrate, and be imaginative, and don't wait for anybody to give you permission to be who you are, to do what you want to do.
And finally, is there anything that you may have come up during the course of our conversation that you wanted to pick up on, or expound upon, or?
I mean, this kind of conversation can go on for hours and hours and hours, because art, the conversation of the necessity and the ability to do art can go on for hours and hours. And I just have to say that I have been very fortunate, because, and I don't even know how, I deserve to live the life that I live, and to have worked with the people I've worked with. Because in acting, that's another thing to remember. Just in life, acting is always, you have to understand, it's always about the other person.
Yeah.
The scene is always about the other person, and if you can live your life that way too, that it's about the other person, then we can come to terms with some stuff and really make things happen.
Yeah, I've often said to young writers, I said, if you are expecting someone to read or to experience something you've put out, you've got to make it worth their while, and that you have to put forth the stuff that's the best, what's the most meaningful to you. Just don't do some half-assed thing. I mean, you're asking people for their time, whether they're watching a play or reading a book or watching a film that you made. You have to put them first.
Yeah, time is valuable.
Yeah.
We don't realize that when we're young.
Yeah.
We realize it now.
Yeah.
But it's very valuable, and how you spend it is very important. Mm-hmm. And again, be intellectually curious, no matter what it is. Any kind of art that you want to practice, or that you engage in your life. Because one of the things that I am adamant about is that it was my responsibility, when I was trying to sculpt artists, to give them something that they could use in their world. Now, if I knew they were never going to be a professional artist or writer or director or whatever, I definitely could assist them and to train them how to live their life as an artist. I mean, let's face it. How you make your bed, how you serve your meals, how you engage your loved ones, how you take care of yourself or whatever. That is all a work of art. You could live your life as a work of art, and part of that is being what I call necessary for the work that we do, is being present in your life. Find things that make you present in your life. I'm heavily involved in the wine world. People smell wines. Why do we give a shit about what they smell like or anything? Because it makes you be present. Why did oh, it smells like like chalk or church bingo or something, I mean, but it makes you be present. Now, my wife is a very renowned cookbook author, and she teaches people how to, cook and why to cook and all of that. It makes you be present in your life. Another big thing I tell the students that I've had: train yourself to fall in love with something every single day. It doesn't have. It can be a football team or a color of a leaf or your dog or anything. But fall in love with something every day. Now that's not mine. I stole that from Stanislavski. He said that. Excuse me. And I think that's very, very important that you can remind yourself to do that. So there we jolly well are, as I say.
Well, I want to thank you for spending a couple of hours speaking with me. I'll link to both the IMDb and Wikipedia pages on you for people who are more interested in following up on things. And it was a great conversation. I thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Cheers.